From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. You may have heard the recent news of a scandal involving state lab technicians who falsified some test results of drinking water. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment suspended further testing for now, saying the results couldn't be trusted. You may also have heard about bogus test results that monitored for water contamination near oil and gas wells around the Front Range. And you may also recall hearing about tainted DNA test results at the state crime laboratory recently that may have affected hundreds of criminal cases. So yes, Colorado has multiple investigations into mishandling of data at several state labs.
Different people involved, different alleged motives, different alleged scope and impact. The thing that really connects them is that they all involve some element of science and some element of the scientific processes being subverted.
That's John Ingold. He reports on health for the Colorado Sun. If you're like me, you may hear about these scandals and think, should I be worried about my health and safety? John has been keeping an eye on those questions. He spoke with me to offer some answers and maybe some reassurance, hopefully. So, John, let's start with these falsified drinking water tests. You spoke with Ned Kalange, the state's chief medical officer with the Department of Public Health and Environment, about it. Briefly, tell us what happened, and did this endanger anyone's drinking water?
Yeah, both great questions. So this involves tests of drinking water that are specifically looking for heavy metals like barium, chromium, and copper. Not lead specifically. I asked about lead,
okay.
And they said they use a different system for testing for lead. And the issue here is not so much that the water tests were themselves inaccurate. It's that there are quality control processes that the techs have to do in addition to the water tests to make sure that the machines are running right. So the allegation here is that there were two chemists that have been accused, and that the allegation is that these chemists were essentially cutting corners on this quality assurance part of their work, not so much on the tests themselves for the drinking water samples to see if those are safe.
Okay.
It's the tests to see if the machine itself is working appropriately. And so the state has done some retesting. They've sent some samples out for testing by third-party labs. They say at this point there is no indication that any drinking water was actually outside any appropriate levels. So the actual samples that they were testing from various water providers around the state, they say that those are okay. It's just it's a process issue that needs to be done correctly to ensure trust in the system.
Which raises the question, why were the lab employees faking the results of these quality assurance calibration tests?
Yeah, always a great question. What's the motive here?
Yeah.
So the machine in question, because I had a similar question, how are they able to do this? And the machine in question is an old machine. Mm-hmm. And so there is like this kind of tedious process where you get the result from the machine and then you have to like copy it over and put it into the state database. And it was in that transfer that it's alleged that these chemists were allowed to manipulate the data on the quality assurance piece to change the results. But the speculation, and it would be speculation, is that this was a sort of a time-saving measure. It's kind of tedious work to test samples where you know what the results are going to be. And
sure.
You know, the allegation is that maybe they were just doing this to cut corners and save themselves some time.
John, how likely is it that this would prompt the state health department to maybe replace some of this aging equipment?
So that's a challenge. These machines, as you can imagine, are not cheap. You can't run down and, buy them at a Target. We're talking several $100,000s here to replace an individual testing machine.
Oof.
That would require some money appropriated by the legislature. And if you've been following the budget conversation at the state capitol this year, the budget is tight. They're looking to cut close to $1 billion. So I'm not sure that actually replacing the equipment is top of mind.
Let's talk about those oil and gas tests. In the fall, state officials reported that two contractors who were supposed to be testing for toxic substances around oil and gas sites in Weld County had submitted fraudulent data. Why are these tests conducted, and what do we know about the false results?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in your intro, there's a variety of lab testing, data quality issues that the state has been facing that kind of came up simultaneously. And one of these is these test results and data that are provided related to water quality testing around oil and gas wells. And so the allegation here is that consultants that were hired by oil and gas producers were submitting these falsified results. Again, obviously distinct from a chemist working in the state lab. But again, just another place where you kind of see that the state relies a lot on data reporting and science to be able to effectively do its regulatory duties. And, a lot of that comes down to humans and making sure that people are playing by the rules.
We know that the technicians were outside contractors and not state employees in this case. Are there concerns around these contractors being maybe too chummy with the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, I think exactly. I think that would be something that the state would want to be investigating. Obviously, you can see the potential for a conflict of interest there. Absolutely.
And then there is an investigation around the state crime lab into a technician who allegedly manipulated DNA testing in criminal investigations. Without going too deep into this case, what has the fallout been like there?
Right. Well, so we've been talking about two instances of potential data manipulation where the state says that we don't actually think that these have had huge concerning impacts on people's health or on the protection for the environment. The crime lab issue is way different, and potentially we're talking hundreds, 600 or more criminal cases where there could have been some type of manipulation of the DNA testing results that you might have to go back into those criminal cases. People's, guilt may be reassessed, their sentences may be reassessed. This, you talk about real world impact, and this is really the one where I think there's probably the most concern.
Well, just to zoom out for a moment, John, we have these multiple scandals involving different areas of public health monitoring. Is this a sign that Colorado's regulatory systems are in trouble?
I don't know that you can quite go that far. But I think that the state knows that it needs to maintain trust in all of these systems. This is something, when I talked with Ned Kalanch, he talked about this. This is something that the director of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation has talked about when it comes to the crime lab. We know we're in a sort of delicate time for people's trust in science. Having these scandals come along, it presents a real challenge for all these agencies because there are important things that these agencies do. The crime lab, their importance is obvious. The state health lab, we're talking about the water chemistry section of the state health lab, but it's huge. It involves food safety testing. It involves disease testing to figure out whether the bat that bit you has rabies runs through the state health lab. If you don't trust that test result, the consequence could be lethal. So the state really has a challenge on its hand to make sure that people have faith in the scientific systems that underlie all these regulations and all this work.
John Ingold is a reporter for the Colorado Sun. We've got links to more Colorado Sun coverage of these three stories. Find them in our show notes or at KUNC.org. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.